The parking garage on Clement Street was the kind of place that felt different at night than it did in the day. Not dangerous exactly, but changed. The way any space changes when the people who fill it during daylight hours have gone home and left it to its own geometry. The overhead lights on the second level were working at about half capacity, 2 of the 4 fixtures dark, and the light that remained had the flat yellow quality of light that is doing its best and not quite succeeding. Isaiah Webb noticed this when he came up the ramp from the street level at 9:43 on a Wednesday evening, because Isaiah noticed the quality of spaces the way some people notice weather, automatically and without deciding to, as information that might be useful. He was walking home from his evening shift at the grocery store on Pratt Street, the same route he took every Wednesday and Friday and Sunday evening, cutting through the garage because it saved 4 minutes off the walk, and 4 minutes at the end of a double shift was 4 minutes he had learned to value. He was 16 years old, and he walked with his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulders slightly forward in the way of someone who has been on their feet since 6 in the morning and whose body is communicating this fact clearly, even if the person inside it is not listening. His lip was not split yet, his hands were steady. The Wednesday evening was still ordinary in every way it was going to be ordinary for the next 45 seconds. He saw the girl first. She was moving along the far wall of the second level with her bag held close against her body, and her pace at that specific register between walking and not walking that is not quite running, because running would mean admitting to yourself what you already know. She was dark-haired and 17, and she was alone, and she was not looking at the cars she was passing, but at the ramp ahead of her and the distance between herself and it. Isaiah tracked her for 1 second and then looked behind her and saw the 3 men. They were spread in a loose line, not hurrying, not needing to hurry. The particular unhurried pace of people who understand that the person ahead of them has nowhere to go that they cannot also go. They were in their 20s, and they were larger than the girl, and the largest of them had his eyes on the back of her head with an expression that Isaiah had no difficulty reading, because some expressions are written in a language that requires no translation. The girl was 15 feet ahead of them, and the ramp was 30 feet ahead of her, and the second level of the parking garage at 9:43 on a Wednesday evening contained no other people and no other sound, except the flat buzz of the working lights and the soft echo of footsteps on concrete. Isaiah stopped walking. He ran the available information in the time it took him to stop, which was not long, and the calculation was not complicated. He was 16 years old and weighed 160 pounds, and the largest of the 3 men had 4 inches and at least 60 pounds on him, and the other 2 were not small. He was at the end of a double shift and his legs were tired in the specific deep way of legs that have been on concrete floors for 15 hours. The ramp was 30 feet from the girl, and the men were 15 feet behind her, and Isaiah was 20 feet to the side of the whole situation, and the exit behind him was 8 steps away and completely available. He stepped forward. He did not raise his voice or run or do anything that would accelerate the situation before he was positioned correctly. He simply moved at an angle that put him between the girl and the men, walking steadily, and he said in a normal conversational voice that was pitched to carry without being loud, that he had been looking all over for her and that her aunt was waiting. The girl looked at him. He looked at her with the specific calm of someone communicating 2 things at once, the surface thing and the real thing, and she was smart enough and frightened enough to receive both. She stopped moving toward the ramp and turned toward Isaiah instead. The 3 men stopped. The largest one looked at Isaiah with the expression of someone reassessing a situation they had considered already resolved. He asked Isaiah who he was. Isaiah told him he was nobody in particular and that he and his friend were going to head out now. The largest man looked at the girl and then at Isaiah, and something shifted in his expression that Isaiah had been expecting and had positioned himself for. He moved so that he was fully between the girl and the men, and he told her quietly and without looking at her to walk to the ramp and not to stop. She walked. Isaiah heard her footsteps behind him accelerate, and he kept his eyes on the three men, and he waited. The largest man watched the girl reach the ramp and disappear down it, and then looked at Isaiah with the unhurried quality of someone who has just had something taken from them and who has decided what they are going to do about it. Isaiah did not move and did not speak. He had nothing else to say, and the situation had moved past the point where words were the relevant currency. What happened in the next 3 minutes was not something Isaiah would describe in detail to anyone who asked later, not because he was ashamed of it, but because it was not the interesting part to him. He did not win. He had not expected to win. Winning was not the variable he had optimized for. He had optimized for time, specifically the amount of time a girl needed to get from the second level of a parking garage to the street outside it. And he had given her that time, and he had been right about how much it would cost him. And the cost was sitting on his face and in his ribs when he finally made it to the ramp and down to the street and out into the night air of Clement Street. He sat down on the curb outside the garage entrance and put his forearms on his knees and looked at the pavement between his feet. His lip was split and swollen on the left side, and his ribs on the right had the specific deep ache of something that was going to be considerably worse by morning. His hands were on his knees, and they were steady, which was the detail he noticed about himself that seemed most worth noticing. The street around him was quiet in the way of a street after something has happened and before anyone has arrived to ask about it. A car passed without slowing. A light in an apartment window 2 floors up went off. The ordinary Wednesday evening continued without him on the sidewalk across from the parking garage with his hands steady on his knees. He did not know the girl's name. He did not know that she was already 2 blocks away, calling her father from the street with her voice controlled and her hands shaking. He did not know what her father was going to do when he understood what had happened and who had made it possible. He did not know that the next 2 weeks were going to be different from every other 2 weeks of the past 2 years in ways he could not have predicted and would not have believed if someone had told him sitting there on the curb in the dark. He knew his ribs hurt and his lip was split and the girl was gone and the street was quiet and his hands were steady on his knees. He sat with those facts for a while, and then he got up and walked home. Isaiah's room on Pratt Street was on the 3rd floor of a building that rented by the week to people who needed somewhere to be while they figured out something more permanent, which was the category Isaiah had been in for 2 years, and which he had stopped thinking of as temporary sometime around the 8-month mark, when it became clear that permanent was a direction rather than a destination, and that the distance to it was going to be covered 1 week at a time. The room was small and had a window that faced the alley and a radiator that worked on its own schedule, and a single overhead light that he had supplemented with a lamp he bought for $4 at the thrift store on 9th Street, because the overhead light alone made the room feel like an interrogation, and he had enough things in his life that felt like interrogations without adding his own ceiling to the list. He kept the room the way he kept everything that was his, with a precision that was not about neatness for its own sake, but about knowing where everything was at all times, which was a different thing and came from a different place. When you moved through enough spaces that were not yours, you learned that the only reliable geography was the one you made yourself. His clothes were folded on the shelf above the radiator in a specific order that meant he could dress in the dark on mornings when the alarm went off at 5:15 and the overhead light felt like a personal attack. His work shoes were under the bed, heel to toe. His backpack hung on the hook on the back of the door, with his work apron for the bakery folded inside it, and his grocery store lanyard coiled on top of the apron, so that he never arrived at either job having forgotten the thing that proved he was supposed to be there. The bakery shift ran from 6 in the morning until 11:30. He walked 4 blocks to get there and 4 blocks back, and on the days he worked both shifts, he came home at noon and ate whatever he had and lay down for 45 minutes with his eyes closed, not always sleeping, sometimes just horizontal, which his body had learned to treat as a reasonable substitute. The grocery store shift ran from 2 in the afternoon until 9 in the evening on weekdays and until 10 on Saturdays, which was the longer shift and the better paid one, and the one that required him to be on his feet on concrete floors for the full duration without the physical variety that the bakery offered, where at least the work moved him around the space. He had been doing both shifts for 14 months. Before that, he had worked only the grocery store for 4 months, and before that, he had worked a warehouse job that paid better, but that let him go in November for reasons the supervisor had described as restructuring, and that Isaiah had understood as something else without having the energy to pursue the distinction. He was 16 years old. He had been 16 for 4 months. On his birthday, he had sat at the small table in his room with a piece of cake from the bakery that his manager Patricia had put in a box and left on the counter with his name on it, which was the kind of gesture that Patricia made without discussing it, and that Isaiah received without discussing it either. And he had eaten the cake and updated the work schedule on the folded piece of paper he kept in his shirt pocket, and gone to bed at 9:30 because the next morning was a bakery morning, and 5:15 came regardless of birthdays. The work schedule was something he had started keeping in the 4th week of the weekly room, because the 2 jobs ran on different weekly patterns, and he had missed a shift in the 3rd week by 1 hour through a confusion about which schedule he was following, and the grocery store manager had given him a warning that he could not afford in any sense of the word afford. After that, he wrote both schedules on a single piece of paper every Sunday evening, morning shift on the left and evening shift on the right, and folded it into quarters and kept it in his shirt pocket where he could check it without taking off his jacket. The paper was replaced every Sunday with a fresh one, and the old one went into the small box on the shelf where he kept the things he was not sure whether to throw away: the birthday card Patricia had left with the cake, a receipt from the thrift store for the lamp, small paper records of a life that was thin on records. He ate 1 real meal a day at noon between the shifts, and supplemented it with whatever the bakery was going to throw out at the end of the morning: day-old bread and the pastries that did not meet the standard for sale, which Patricia allowed without mentioning it, and which Isaiah accepted without mentioning it because they had developed an understanding that operated entirely below the level of language, and that suited both of them. He was not hungry in the dramatic way. He was hungry in the background way, the way you are hungry when you have adjusted your expectations of what not hungry means and have been running on that adjustment long enough that it feels like a baseline rather than a deficit. He had one friend, which was a generous use of the word, because the friendship operated entirely within the boundaries of their shared shift at the grocery store and had never been tested by anything outside it. His name was Terrence, and he was 19, and he talked constantly about moving to Atlanta, and had been talking about it for the 4 months Isaiah had known him, with the specific consistency of someone who has decided that talking about a thing is a form of progress toward it. Isaiah listened to the Atlanta plans with the patience of someone who understood that some people needed to say things out loud before they could figure out whether they meant them, and that the service of listening was not a small thing, even when it was the only thing you were offering. He did not talk about the foster care system to anyone. This was not a decision he had made consciously. It was simply a subject that did not come up because he did not bring it up, and because the people in his life, Patricia and Terrence and the superintendent of the building on Pratt Street, whose name was Gill, and who communicated primarily through the angle of his eyebrows, were not people who asked the kinds of questions that would have led there. He had been in 4 placements across 8 years before aging out, and the cleanest summary he had of that experience was that it had taught him 2 things. The first was that the people who were supposed to show up sometimes did and sometimes did not, and that building your architecture around the ones who did was a structural error. The second was that he was more reliable than most of the people who had been assigned to be reliable for him, which was not a boast, but simply an observation he had made and then built his life around. On the Sunday evening before the Wednesday of the parking garage, he sat at the small table in his room under the lamp from the thrift store and wrote out the new week's schedule on a fresh piece of paper. Bakery Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Grocery Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday. He folded it into quarters and put it in his shirt pocket and looked at the week it represented. 7 shifts, 61 hours. He picked up his pencil and looked at the arithmetic for a moment and then set the pencil down and turned off the lamp and went to bed. He was up at 5:15 the next morning with no knowledge that the Wednesday of that week was going to end differently from the way Wednesdays ended, and that the piece of paper in his shirt pocket was going to matter in a way he could not have anticipated when he wrote it out under the thrift store lamp on a Sunday evening in a room on Pratt Street that smelled of old radiator and was exactly his. Cole Hargrove had raised Nadia alone since she was 4 years old, and he had done it the way he did most things, without a manual and without asking for one, working from the understanding that the most important thing he could give her was not protection, but preparation. There was a version of fatherhood that put a wall around a child and called the wall love, and Cole had rejected that version early, and specifically because he understood that walls come down, and that a child raised behind one has no idea what to do when they do. What he had given Nadia instead was information: how to read a room, how to read a person, how to know the difference between a situation that required patience and a situation that required speed, and how to make that determination in the time available rather than the time you wished you had. She was 17 years old, and she was sharp in the way that children are sharp when they have been taken seriously by the adults around them for their entire lives. She did not perform confidence, she simply had it, in the specific form of someone who knows their own mind and has been encouraged to trust it. She was a junior at Millbrook High, and she had a part-time job at the library on Cedar Street 3 afternoons a week, and she had opinions about most things and expressed them in the direct economy of someone who had grown up watching her father use 4 words where other people used 20. Cole was 49 years old and had been vice president of the Iron Cross chapter for 6 years and a member for 19 before that. He was broad and deliberate, and when he went still in a situation, the people around him paid attention because they had learned that his stillness was not the absence of something, but the presence of it. Thought moving fast behind a face that had learned not to broadcast its speed. He had a habit of going completely quiet when something required his full consideration, and the quiet had a weight to it that was different from ordinary silence, the way a held breath is different from breathing. Wednesday evenings, Nadia worked the library closing shift, which ended at 8:30, and she walked home through the Clement Street area because it was the most direct route, and because she had walked it 24 times and had never had a reason to walk a different way. She was not careless. Cole had not raised her to be careless. She was appropriately alert in the way of a 17-year-old girl who has been taught to pay attention to the quality of spaces and who knows what to do with what she notices. She noticed the men on the first level of the garage when she entered at the Clement Street side, 3 of them near a car, and she noticed that the noticing felt different from ordinary noticing. And so she moved to the far wall, and she moved at a pace that was measured, and she kept the ramp in her sight line. They were behind her by the time she reached the second level. She knew it without turning around, because the sound of the garage had changed in the specific way it changes when the footsteps behind you are calibrated to yours, staying close enough to close the distance without triggering the decision to run. She had made the calculation about running, and the calculation was not in favor of it, because the ramp was 30 feet ahead, and she had done the geometry, and the geometry was not good. She was holding her bag close and walking and keeping her eyes on the ramp and thinking about what the next 30 feet required of her, when a voice came from her left that said he had been looking all over for her and that her aunt was waiting. She looked. A boy was crossing the garage floor at an angle that was going to put him between her and the men behind her, and he was looking at her with a specific directness that communicated two things simultaneously: that he was not actually someone who knew her, and that she should behave as though he was. She understood both things in the time it took him to reach her, and she turned toward him, and she walked with him, and she heard him tell her quietly to walk to the ramp and not stop. And she walked to the ramp, and she did not stop. And she went down, and she went through the lobby, and she went out onto Clement Street, and she kept walking until she had put a full block between herself and the garage entrance. And then she stopped and took out her phone. Cole answered on the second ring. She told him what had happened with the control in her voice that was not the absence of fear, but the management of it, which was different, and which Cole heard accurately because he had been listening to her voice for 17 years and knew every register it contained. He asked her where she was, and she told him, and he told her to stay there and not to move, and she said she knew, and he was already moving toward his keys when he asked her about the boy. She told him what she had seen, the angle of approach, and the words, and the way he had positioned himself, and then told her to go. Cole asked her if the boy had come out behind her. She told him she did not know, that she had not looked back because he had told her not to stop, and she had not stopped. Cole was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was processing something at speed. He told her he was coming, and he hung up. He called Danny from the car. He told him the address and the situation, and that there was a boy, and that he wanted to know who the boy was before the night was over, if that was possible. Danny said he would make some calls, and Cole said good, and ended the call. He drove to Clement Street and found Nadia on the corner exactly where she said she would be, and she got in the car, and he looked at her for a moment, and she looked at him, and neither of them said the thing that was in both of their minds, which was how differently the parking garage on Clement Street could have ended without a boy they had never seen before crossing the floor at an angle and putting himself between his daughter and 3 men in the dark. Cole drove. Nadia sat in the passenger's seat with her bag in her lap and her hands steady on top of it, and looked out the window at Clement Street going past, and did not say anything else until they were home. Danny started with the garage. He drove to Clement Street on Thursday morning before 8 and walked the second level in the flat morning light coming through the concrete gaps in the exterior wall, and looked at the space the way he looked at most spaces, as a collection of facts waiting to be read. He found nothing useful on the second level and went down to the first and spoke to the attendant in the booth at the street entrance, a man named Felix who had been working the evening shift for 3 years and who knew the garage the way people know spaces they occupy for 8 hours at a time, which is to say, completely and without thinking about it. Felix told Danny he had seen the girl come through at around 9:40 and that he had seen 3 men follow her up the ramp about 30 seconds behind, and that a boy had come through a few minutes after them going up, and that the 3 men had come down about 4 minutes after that, moving faster than they went up, and that the boy had come down last and had gone out to the street and sat on the curb, and that Felix had considered calling someone and had not, and that he was not proud of that. Danny asked him what the boy looked like. Felix said, tall for his age, lean, dark jacket, and that he had sat on the curb for a while with his hands on his knees, and then gotten up and walked north on Clement Street. Danny thanked him and drove north on Clement Street slowly, looking at the businesses on both sides. There were 2 restaurants and a dry cleaner and a pharmacy and a grocery store and a bakery and a hardware store. He stopped at the grocery store first because it was the largest, and because large meant more employees, and more employees meant a higher chance that someone had seen a 16-year-old boy in a dark jacket on a Wednesday evening. The manager was a heavy-set man named Gerald, who listened to Danny's description and said it could be one of 3 stock boys, but that none of them worked Wednesday evenings except one, and that one was named Isaiah, and that he had worked the evening shift the previous Wednesday and every Wednesday for the past 14 months. Gerald said Isaiah was a good worker and said it the way employers say things about employees they do not want to lose, as information and as a mild warning simultaneously. Danny asked if Isaiah was working today. Gerald said he was on the evening shift starting at 2 and that Danny was welcome to come back then or to leave a message and he would pass it along. Danny said he would come back. He called Cole from the parking lot and told him he had a name and a workplace and a shift time. Cole was quiet for a moment and then said he would come at 2, and Danny said he would meet him there. Cole asked if Danny had found out anything else. Danny told him he had found out that the boy had sat on the curb outside the garage with his hands on his knees for a while after, and then gotten up and walked home, and that a man in a booth who could have called someone had not. Cole did not say anything about that, and Danny did not either because there was nothing to say about it, that the fact itself had not already said better. Cole arrived at the grocery store at 1:50 with Danny beside him and one other rider, a quiet member named Boone, who was 38 and whose presence in situations that required a specific kind of steadiness Cole had come to rely on without ever discussing it with him. They did not go inside immediately. They stood in the parking lot, and Cole looked at the store entrance and the cars and the ordinary Thursday afternoon moving around them, and he thought about a boy sitting on a curb with his hands on his knees in the dark after 3 men had finished with him, and then getting up and walking home. He thought about what kind of person got up and walked home after that, and what the walking home said about everything that had come before the parking garage in that person's life. They went in at 2:15. Gerald pointed them toward the back of the store where the stockroom opened onto the floor, and Cole walked through the produce section and the dry goods aisle and found Isaiah on a ladder restocking the top shelf of the cereal aisle with a box cutter in his hand, and the specific, focused efficiency of someone who has learned to work fast because fast is a form of job security. Cole stopped at the end of the aisle and looked at him for a moment before he said anything. The boy's left lip was swollen, and there was a bruise developing under his right eye that had not been there when he went to work the previous Wednesday. His hands on the shelf and the box cutter were steady, and he was moving with no indication that his ribs were doing what Cole suspected they were doing, which was a form of discipline that Cole recognized and respected, and which told him something about who he was looking at before a single word had been exchanged. Cole said his name. Isaiah looked down from the ladder with the careful assessment of someone who has learned to evaluate what is in front of them before they respond to it. He looked at Cole and at Danny and at Boone and at the cuts on their vests, and he came down from the ladder one rung at a time without rushing and stood at the bottom of it and looked at Cole and waited. Cole told him his name and told him that Nadia was his daughter and that he wanted to talk if Isaiah had a few minutes. Isaiah looked at the shelf and then at the box cutter in his hand, and he folded it closed and put it in his apron pocket, and told Cole he had a break at 2:30 and that they could talk then. They sat in the small break room at the back of the store at 2:30, Cole and Isaiah across from each other at a table that had seen better decades, and a coffee machine on the counter that was producing something that smelled optimistic. Danny and Boone stayed near the door. Isaiah had taken off his apron and folded it on the table beside him, and he sat with his hands flat on the surface and looked at Cole with the specific quality of someone who is not going to fill silence that does not belong to them. Cole looked at the bruise under his eye and the split lip and asked him how the ribs were. Isaiah told him they were fine. Cole told him that fine was a word people used when they did not want to answer the actual question. Isaiah looked at him for a moment and then said they were sore and that sore was temporary. Cole nodded. He asked Isaiah what had made him stop. Isaiah looked at the table and then at Cole and said he did not know what Cole meant. Cole told him that the garage had a man in a booth at the entrance who had seen the situation and had not stopped, and that other people made that same calculation every day in every city, and that he was asking what had made Isaiah's calculation come out differently. Isaiah was quiet for long enough that the coffee machine behind him finished its cycle and clicked off. Then he told Cole that it had not felt like a calculation. Cole looked at him. Isaiah said that some things were just what you did, and that the doing of it and the thinking about it were not always the same process, and that on Wednesday evening they had not been. Cole sat with that for a moment. He asked Isaiah where he lived. Isaiah told him Pratt Street. Cole asked if he had family in Millbrook. Isaiah looked at his hands on the table and told him no. Cole asked who he lived with. Isaiah said himself. Cole asked how old he was. Isaiah told him 16 and watched Cole receive that information and did not look away while Cole received it. Cole told him that he wanted to come by and see him over the weekend if that was all right, and Isaiah looked at him with the careful measuring expression of someone running the available options and trying to determine which of them was the one being offered. He asked Cole what he wanted. Cole told him he wanted to say thank you properly, and that properly meant in a way that was worth saying, and that he did not yet know exactly what that looked like, but that he would like the chance to figure it out if Isaiah was willing to let him. Isaiah looked at his hands again, and then at Cole, and then he said, "All right," in the tone of someone making a provisional agreement and reserving the right to revise it. Cole stood up and put out his hand, and Isaiah shook it, and Cole felt the calluses on the boy's palm and said nothing about them. He thanked Isaiah, and they left. And Isaiah sat in the break room alone for a few minutes after, before he put his apron back on and went back to the cereal aisle. Cole came to the bakery on Saturday morning before the shift started. He arrived at 5:50, and Isaiah was already there, unlocking the back door with the specific practiced motion of someone who has done the same thing enough times that the motion no longer requires thought. He looked over his shoulder when he heard the truck and watched Cole park and get out and cross the small back lot without surprise, the way you watch something arrive that you were not sure would arrive but had prepared yourself for. Patricia was inside, and the ovens were already running, and the smell of the morning's first bread was coming through the door in warm waves. Isaiah held the door, and Cole went in, and Patricia looked at Cole from behind the work table, with the expression of a woman who has been running a small bakery for 22 years, and who has seen a considerable variety of people come through her back door, and who is reserving judgment on this particular one. Isaiah introduced them, and Cole shook Patricia's hand and thanked her for the time, and Patricia told him he had until 6:15, and looked at Isaiah and went back to the dough she was working. They sat at the small table in the corner of the back room, where Isaiah ate his noon meal on the days he worked both shifts, and Cole put 2 coffees on the table that he had brought from somewhere, and Isaiah looked at the cups and then at Cole and picked one up. Cole asked him how long he had been at the bakery. Isaiah told him 14 months. Cole asked about the grocery store, and Isaiah said the same. Cole asked him what his week looked like, and Isaiah reached into his shirt pocket without thinking, and took out the folded piece of paper and handed it to Cole, and then looked at his own hand as though he was not entirely sure what it had just done. Cole unfolded it and read it, and folded it, and handed it back, and did not say anything about it immediately. He asked Isaiah about the foster care system instead, directly and without softening the question, and Isaiah looked at him for a moment and then answered it the same way. He told Cole about the 4 placements across 8 years, and about aging out at 16, and about the weekly room on Pratt Street, and about the 2 jobs and the noon meal and the Sunday evening ritual of writing out the new schedule. He told it the way he told most things, without inflection, in the manner of someone reporting facts about a situation rather than asking for a response to it. Cole listened without moving, with the complete attention of someone for whom listening was not a passive activity, and Isaiah found that he was saying more than he had intended to say by the time he stopped, which was not something that happened to him, and which he noticed about himself with a mild surprise he kept off his face. Cole asked him one more question when he finished. He asked him what he wanted. Not what he needed, what he wanted. Isaiah looked at the table, and then at his coffee, and then at Cole, and told him he wanted to finish high school, and he wanted to go to community college, and he wanted to eventually not work 2 shifts a day, and he said all of it in the same flat, repertorial tone as everything else, and then picked up his coffee. Cole nodded. He asked Isaiah if he had ever heard of Marcus Webb. Isaiah was quiet for a moment, and then said the name like something he was checking against a memory. Marcus Webb. And told Cole that Marcus had been his caseworker, and that Marcus had closed his file on his 16th birthday. Cole asked him what that had been like. Isaiah told him that it had been like most things in the system, which was that it had happened on schedule and then it was over. He said it without bitterness, which was the part that landed hardest, the complete absence of anger about something that warranted it, the way a person sounds when they have processed something so thoroughly that the processing itself has become invisible. Cole put his cup down on the table and looked at it, and then looked at Isaiah and told him he was going to come back on Monday, and that he would like Isaiah to meet some people from the chapter if that was all right. Isaiah asked him what people. Cole told him men who had made some decisions about things and who wanted to tell him about those decisions directly rather than through Cole. Isaiah looked at him with the measuring expression and asked what decisions. Cole told him they were decisions about Isaiah's situation and that they were good ones, and that he would like Isaiah to hear them before he decided what he thought of them. Isaiah was quiet for a long time. Then he told Cole that he had heard that kind of sentence before, and that it had not always pointed where it suggested it would point. Cole told him that was a fair thing to say, and that he could not offer Isaiah anything more than his word, and that his word was what it was, and that Isaiah would have to make his own judgment about that. Isaiah looked at him for another moment and said, "All right," the same provisional tone as before, and Cole told him Monday at 6, and stood up and shook his hand and left. Danny had found Marcus Webb on Friday. It had not taken long because Marcus was still at the county foster care office on Hamilton Street, where he had been for 11 years, and his name was in the directory, and his extension was answered on the second ring by a man who sounded like someone who picked up his phone quickly because he had learned that the calls he did not pick up quickly were the ones that came back worse. Danny told him who he was, and told him he was calling about Isaiah Webb, and there was a silence on Marcus's end that was different from the silence of someone thinking, and was closer to the silence of someone who has been expecting a call about a specific subject for a long time, and is now adjusting to its arrival. Danny told him the chapter had found Isaiah, and that Isaiah was all right, and that they were involved in his situation, and that they would like to speak with him if he was willing. Marcus asked how Isaiah was. Danny told him he was working 2 jobs and living in a weekly room, and had recently stepped in front of 3 men in a parking garage to protect a stranger. Marcus was quiet again. Then he said he would come to the chapter garage if that was where Cole wanted to meet, and Danny said it was, and gave him a time. Marcus Webb was 44 years old, and had been a caseworker for 17 years, and had closed more files than he could accurately recall, and had carried a small number of them differently from the others afterward. Isaiah's was one of those. It was in a folder in his desk drawer with the boy's name on the tab, and he had opened it twice in the 2 years since the birthday, and both times he had closed it again without doing anything with it, which was its own kind of answer to a question he had not been asking himself directly. He drove to the chapter garage on Monday afternoon and sat in his car outside it for a moment before he went in. The garage was large and smelled of oil and metal, and the coffee on the filing cabinet, and there were 4 men in leather vests standing or sitting in various parts of it, and Cole was at the workbench, and he straightened when Marcus came in, and shook his hand and gestured at the chair near the office door. They sat down, and Cole told Marcus what the chapter knew about Isaiah's 2 years, and Marcus listened with his hands folded in his lap and his face doing the work of someone receiving information they mostly already had, but had been avoiding the full weight of. When Cole finished, Marcus told him that the system required the file to be closed at 16, and that he had followed that requirement, and that following a requirement and doing the right thing were not always the same thing, and that he had known that on the day he closed the file, and had made the choice that he had made, and that he was not going to pretend otherwise. Cole looked at him and said he respected that. Marcus asked Cole what the chapter intended to do. Cole told him they intended to be present in Isaiah's life in whatever way Isaiah allowed, and that Isaiah was going to make his own decisions about what he allowed, and that the chapter was going to respect those decisions and work within them. Marcus looked at the garage around him and then back at Cole and asked him one question. He asked whether Cole understood that Isaiah had been let down enough times that his willingness to say all right was not the same as trust, and that trust was the thing that actually mattered, and that it was built differently from willingness and took longer and could not be rushed without breaking. Cole told him he understood that, and that he intended to earn it the same way it was always earned, which was by showing up consistently and without conditions until the showing up became something Isaiah could count on. Marcus looked at him for a long moment, and then nodded once, and that was the closest thing to approval he had, and Cole accepted it as what it was. Things began changing around Isaiah on a Tuesday, and he noticed them the way he noticed most things, carefully and without comment, filing each one in the part of his mind that tracked the difference between coincidence and pattern. The first thing was Gerald. On Tuesday afternoon, Gerald called Isaiah into the small office behind the stockroom and told him that the evening shift rate was going up by $2 an hour effective immediately, and that Isaiah was being moved to lead stock, which came with a key to the back entrance and the responsibility of opening on the evenings Gerald could not be there. Isaiah stood in the office doorway and looked at Gerald and asked him what had changed. Gerald told him that good workers got recognized eventually, and that eventually had arrived. Isaiah looked at him for a moment and then said thank you and went back to the floor and stocked the cereal aisle with the same efficiency as always, and thought about the word eventually and what it usually preceded. The second thing was Gil. On Wednesday evening, Isaiah came home to find the radiator in his room had been bled and balanced, which was something he had submitted a written request for in March, and which Gil had acknowledged with the specific eyebrow angle that meant he had heard and was making no promises. The radiator now produced heat at a consistent and controllable level. Gil was in the hallway when Isaiah came up the stairs, and he told Isaiah it had been on the list, and Isaiah said he appreciated it, and Gil went back downstairs without further discussion, which was the full range of their conversational register, and Isaiah did not expect more from it. The third thing was Patricia. On Thursday morning, she told Isaiah she was adding a Saturday closing shift, which paid at the higher weekend rate, and asked if he wanted it. He told her he was already on Saturday evenings at the grocery store. She told him she had spoken to Gerald. Isaiah put down the bread he was slicing and looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression she wore when she had done something she intended to stand behind and was not particularly interested in discussing the process. He asked her what she had arranged. She told him the Saturday evening grocery shift was being covered by another employee and that the closing shift at the bakery was his if he wanted it, and that it paid $3 more per hour than his current rate. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. Then he told her he would take it. He did not call Cole. He had Cole's number from the Monday meeting written on a plain card that Cole had set on the break room table without making a production of it, and he had put the card in the small box on his shelf with the birthday card and the thrift store receipt. He was aware that the changes around him were connected to Cole and the chapter, and he was aware that his awareness of this was not the same as knowing what to do with it. He had been in situations before where things improved around him in ways that were connected to someone else's decision, and he knew from experience that the improvement and the decision were not always pointed in the same direction, and that the distance between the two was where most of the problems lived. He updated the work schedule on Sunday evening. He wrote the bakery Saturday closing shift in the right column where the grocery store Saturday evening shift had been, and he looked at the page for a moment before folding it. The schedule had one fewer shift than the previous week for the first time in 14 months. He folded it into quarters and put it in his shirt pocket, and looked at the small table and the lamp and the radiator producing heat at a reasonable and consistent temperature, and he sat with all of it without deciding anything about it yet. Cole came by the grocery store on Monday evening at the end of Isaiah's shift. He was outside when Isaiah came out, leaning against his truck with his arms folded, not performing waiting, but simply waiting, and Isaiah stopped on the sidewalk and looked at him and said that he knew it was Cole. Cole told him he knew that Isaiah knew and that he was not trying to be subtle about it. Isaiah told him that was something. Cole said he wanted to ask him directly how he felt about what had happened with the jobs and the room. Isaiah looked at the street and then at Cole and told him that he felt like someone had rearranged things around him without asking him first, and that he was not sure how he felt about that, and that being not sure was not the same as feeling bad about it, but that he wanted to say it plainly. Cole told him that was fair, and that he should have come to Isaiah first and asked rather than moved around him, and that he was saying so now because it was true and because Isaiah deserved to hear it said directly. Isaiah looked at him for a moment. He asked Cole what the chapter wanted from him. Cole told him nothing. Isaiah told him that nothing was a difficult thing to believe from people he did not know who had rearranged his employment situation in a week. Cole said he understood why it was difficult to believe, and that he was not going to argue with the difficulty. He told Isaiah that what the chapter had done was not an investment that required a return, and that if Isaiah decided tomorrow that he did not want anything to do with any of them, then the job rate and the radiator and the shift change stayed regardless, because they were not conditional. Isaiah looked at his shoes and then at Cole, and told him he had been told things were not conditional before. Cole said he knew. Isaiah said that knowing and meaning it were different things. Cole said he knew that too, and that the only evidence he could offer was time, and that time was what he was asking Isaiah for. Not trust, not gratitude, just time, and the chance to show up in it consistently. Nadia had been to the grocery store on Thursday evening. Isaiah had not been there because his shift had ended an hour earlier, and when he came in on Friday, Gerald told him a girl had come by and left something at the counter for him. It was a library book, the kind with the plastic protective cover that public libraries put on their collections, and tucked inside the front cover was a note in handwriting that was direct and economical in the way of someone who does not waste words. The note said she had been looking for a book that said what she wanted to say, and had not found one, so she had picked the one she thought he might want to read instead, and that she hoped his ribs were better, and that her name was Nadia. Isaiah stood at the counter holding the book, and then read the title, and then read the note again, and put the note back inside the cover, and put the book in his backpack, and finished his shift. He sat on his bed that evening with the book on his knees and the lamp from the thrift store throwing its yellow light across the room. He read the first chapter and then put the book on the shelf above the radiator where he could see it from the table. He thought about a girl who had walked out of a parking garage because a stranger had told her to walk and not stop, and who had come to his workplace and left him a library book with a note in handwriting that did not waste words. He thought about what it cost a person to walk into a place and leave something for someone they had never properly met, and what the leaving of it said about the person doing the leaving. He thought about this for a while, and then he got up and took the work schedule out of his shirt pocket and looked at it, and then put it back and turned off the lamp. Marcus Webb opened Isaiah's folder on a Wednesday morning and read through it from the beginning for the first time since he had closed it. He had opened it twice before in 2 years, and both times he had looked at the cover and closed it again without reading it. And this time, he read it all the way through, every placement note and every school record and every caseworker observation, including the ones he had written himself. And when he finished, he closed it and put it in the center of his desk instead of back in the drawer and looked at it for a long time. He had 17 active cases and 3 that were approaching the age threshold, and he pulled those 3 files after lunch and read through them with the specific attention he had not been applying to them before the conversation with Danny in the chapter garage. They were 14, 15, and 15, 2 boys and a girl, and each file had the particular quality of files that record a life in institutional language, which was the language of what happened and when and where, which was not the same as the language of who. Marcus sat with the 3 files until 5 in the afternoon, when his phone reminded him of a meeting he was already late for, and he put the files in the center of his desk next to Isaiah's and went to the meeting. Nadia told her father about the library book on Thursday evening at dinner. She told him she had left it at the grocery store counter because she had gone to the store and Isaiah's shift had already ended, and that she had written a note and put it inside the cover. Cole listened and asked her what the note had said. She told him, and Cole looked at his plate and then at Nadia and told her that was a good thing to do. Nadia told him she knew it was a good thing to do, and that she had not done it because it was a good thing to do, but because she had been thinking about Isaiah since Wednesday and needed to do something specific rather than continue thinking. Cole looked at her and said that was a distinction worth making. Nadia said she knew that too, and went back to her dinner. Danny sat in the chapter garage on Thursday evening after the other members had gone and wrote in his small notebook. He wrote what he knew about Isaiah in the specific, sequential way he recorded things, not impressions but facts arranged in order of when they had become known. He wrote about the 4 placements and the aging out, and the weekly room, and the 2 jobs, and the Sunday evening schedule. He wrote about the parking garage and what Felix in the booth had seen and what it had cost Isaiah to give the girl the time she needed. He wrote one line at the bottom of the page that was not a fact, but that he put in the notebook anyway, because it was the kind of observation that needed to exist somewhere outside his own head. He wrote that the boy had spent 2 years building a life that held, without any help from anyone, and that the building of it said something specific about who he was that no placement record captured, and that the chapter needed to understand that what they were dealing with was not a situation to be fixed, but a person to be known. Isaiah walked a different route home on Thursday and Friday. He did not decide to walk a different route. He simply found himself turning right instead of left at the corner of Pratt and Clement, and adding 6 blocks to the walk home and not minding the addition in the way he minded most inefficiencies. The longer route took him past the library where Nadia worked on Cedar Street, and past the chapter garage on Randolph Street, and past the community college on the far side of the park where the buildings were lit in the early evening in a way that made the campus look like a place that had things to offer if you could get yourself inside it. He walked past the community college twice and looked at the enrollment board in the window near the main entrance and kept walking. He read the book Nadia had left him across 4 evenings. It was not the kind of book he would have chosen himself, but it was the kind of book that rewarded finishing, and he finished it and sat with it afterward in the way of someone who has received something they did not know they needed and is taking a moment to acknowledge the receiving of it. He returned it to the library on Saturday morning before his bakery shift because it was a library book, and library books had due dates, and returning things on time was a form of reliability he applied to everything he could apply it to. Nadia was not there. He left the book at the desk with the return slip and went to work. Cole sat in the parking lot of the community college on Saturday afternoon. He had driven past it twice in the previous week and stopped once at the enrollment office and picked up an information packet without going inside and read it at the kitchen table that evening. He was not a man who made decisions about other people's lives without their knowledge, and he was aware of the distance between gathering information and making a decision, and he kept himself on the correct side of that distance. What he was doing was preparation for a conversation he had not yet had, and might not have, depending on what Isaiah said and when he said it, and whether the time for saying it arrived at the pace he hoped it would. Nadia found Isaiah on Monday. She had gone to the library early and had looked at the return slip on the book and seen that he had brought it back on Saturday morning and that it had been returned in the same condition it was lent, which she had expected but appreciated. She went to the grocery store on Monday afternoon on her way home from school, and this time his shift had not ended, and he was in the produce section restocking the apple display, and she walked down the aisle and stopped beside him and said hello. He looked at her and said hello back, and she told him she was glad he had liked it enough to return it, and he told her that he returned library books regardless of whether he liked them, because they had due dates. She looked at him and then said that was fair and asked if he had liked it. He told her he had. She asked what part. He told her the part in the middle where the character realizes that the thing he has been protecting himself from was not the thing that was going to hurt him. Nadia was quiet for a moment, and then told him that was the part she had thought he would find, and she said it without satisfaction, simply as a statement about what she had anticipated and what had turned out to be true. Isaiah looked at the apple display and then at her, and asked how she had known. She told him she had not known, but had made an educated guess based on available information. He told her that was a careful way to put it. She said she was a careful person. He told her he had gathered that, and went back to the apples. She stood there for another moment, and then told him she would see him around, and walked back down the aisle, and Isaiah watched her go in the reflection of the refrigerator door beside him without turning around. Marcus came to the chapter garage on a Thursday afternoon without calling ahead. He had been thinking about coming since Monday and had talked himself out of it twice, and on Thursday he simply got in his car before he could talk himself out of it a third time and drove to Randolph Street and parked and went in. Cole was at the workbench. He looked up when Marcus came through the side door and put down the tool he was holding and wiped his hands on a rag and waited. Marcus told him he had been reading files. Cole asked him which ones. Marcus told him 3 files belonging to kids who were approaching the age threshold, and that he had been reading them differently than he had been reading them before, and that the difference was the conversation in this garage 2 weeks ago. Cole looked at him and said that was something. Marcus said it was not enough, but that it was what he had. He sat down in the chair near the office door, and Cole leaned against the workbench, and they looked at each other across the space of the garage, the way 2 people look at each other when they are both aware that the conversation they are about to have is going to be more honest than comfortable. Marcus told Cole that he had closed Isaiah's file on the boy's birthday and driven away, and that he had told himself Isaiah was capable, and that capable meant fine, and that he had known the difference between capable and fine and had chosen to apply the easier definition because the harder one had a cost he had not wanted to pay. Cole said nothing. Marcus said he was not asking for Cole's opinion on that. He was stating it because it was true, and because saying true things out loud was the first step in doing something different from what you had done before. Cole asked him what he wanted to do differently. Marcus told him he wanted to stay in contact with Isaiah, not as a caseworker because that file was closed, but as someone who was paying attention and had decided to keep paying attention regardless of what the system required. Cole told him Isaiah would make his own decision about that. Marcus said he knew, and that he was not asking Cole's permission. He was telling Cole his intention, so that the two of them were not working at cross purposes around a 16-year-old who had enough cross purposes in his life already. Cole looked at him for a moment and then said, "All right," and picked up his tool. And Marcus stood up, and they shook hands, and Marcus left. Nadia told Cole on Friday evening that she had spoken to someone at the community college enrollment office about the application process for students who were currently enrolled in high school. Cole asked her why. She told him because Isaiah had mentioned wanting to go, and because the enrollment deadline for the spring semester was 6 weeks away, and because information was more useful than intention when a deadline was involved. Cole looked at her across the kitchen table and told her that she needed to let Isaiah make his own decisions. Nadia told him she was not making his decisions, she was gathering information that he could use to make his own. Cole considered this and told her there was a meaningful difference between those two things, and that she needed to be sure she was doing the first one and not the second one wearing the first one's clothes. Nadia said she understood the distinction. Cole said good and went back to his coffee. Isaiah found the community college enrollment packet on Wednesday. It was in his locker at the grocery store, slipped through the ventilation slots at the top, and it had a note clipped to the front in the handwriting he recognized from the library book note. The note said the deadline was 6 weeks away, and that the application was free for students currently enrolled in high school, and that she was not telling him what to do with the information. He stood at his open locker, holding the packet for a moment, and then put it in his backpack and closed the locker and went to the floor. He read through the packet that evening at the small table under the lamp. The application was 2 pages. The requirements were a high school transcript and 2 letters of recommendation and a personal statement of no more than 500 words. He read the personal statement requirement twice, and then closed the packet and put it on the shelf next to the library book. He called Cole the next morning. It was the first time he had called the number on the plain card, and he stood in his room before his bakery shift and listened to it ring, and when Cole answered, he told him he wanted to talk about the community college and about what the chapter had intended when they rearranged the job situation, and whether those two things were connected. Cole told him they were connected, and that he had wanted Isaiah to be able to reduce his hours and have time and energy left over for something other than the 2 jobs, and that community college was exactly the kind of something he had had in mind. Isaiah asked him why he had not said that directly at the beginning. Cole told him he had not said it because he had wanted Isaiah to arrive at it himself, and that in retrospect he should have been more direct, and that he was saying so now. Isaiah was quiet for a moment and then said he appreciated the honesty. Cole said good and asked him what he needed. Isaiah told him he needed 2 letters of recommendation and that he did not know who to ask. Cole told him he had some thoughts about that and asked if Isaiah could come to the garage on Saturday morning. Isaiah said he could. He told Patricia on Friday that he was applying to the community college. She was at the work table when he said it, and she stopped what she was doing and looked at him with the expression she wore when she was receiving news she was going to be pleased about and was not yet ready to show it. She asked him what program. He told him he was thinking engineering. She told him that made sense and went back to the dough, and then stopped again and told him she would write him a letter and that it would be a good one because she did not write letters that were not good ones. He thanked her, and she told him not to thank her and to get back to work. He went to the garage on Saturday morning at the time Cole had said. Danny was there, and Boone, and 2 other members, and Cole was at the workbench, and he looked up when Isaiah came through the side door and nodded and gestured at the chair. Isaiah sat down and looked at the garage around him, the tools on the pegboard, and the bikes in various stages of repair, and the coffee on the filing cabinet, and he took in the space with the systematic inventory he applied to new environments. Cole brought him a coffee and sat on a stool across from him, and told him that Gerald had agreed to write a letter, and that Patricia had already agreed, and that if Isaiah wanted a 3rd one, Cole would write it himself. Isaiah held the coffee cup and looked at Cole, and told him that Cole did not know him well enough to write him a letter. Cole told him that he knew Isaiah had stepped in front of 3 men for a stranger without calculating the cost, and that he knew Isaiah had been building a life alone for 2 years with the kind of reliability that most grown men he knew could not claim, and that he knew Isaiah was sitting in this garage on a Saturday morning considering a future he had earned without anyone's help, and that if that was not enough to write a letter about, then Cole did not know what was. Isaiah looked at his coffee. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "All right." Cole called Isaiah on a Thursday evening and told him the chapter was gathering at the garage on Saturday morning and that he wanted Isaiah there. Isaiah asked what was happening. Cole told him the chapter had made some decisions and wanted to tell him about them directly, and that there was nothing to be concerned about, and that Marcus Webb was going to be there. Isaiah was quiet for a moment at the mention of Marcus. Then he said he would be there, and hung up and sat on his bed in the room on Pratt Street and looked at the wall for a while before he turned off the lamp. He arrived at the garage at 9:50. The side door was open, and he could hear voices inside, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before he went in, the way he stood in the threshold of any new situation, taking inventory before committing to entry. The chapter was there, 7 men in various positions around the garage, Danny at the workbench, Boone near the back wall, the others on stools or standing, and Cole in the center of the space, with his arms at his sides and his face carrying the specific quality of someone who has prepared for something and is ready to begin. Marcus Webb was sitting in the chair near the office door in a gray sweater, with his hands folded in his lap, and he looked at Isaiah when Isaiah came in, and Isaiah looked at him, and they acknowledged each other with the careful nod of 2 people who share a history that neither of them has finished processing. Cole told Isaiah to come in, and Isaiah came in and stood near the center of the room, and Cole stood across from him, and the chapter arranged itself in the loose circle of people who are present as witnesses rather than participants. Cole spoke first. He told Isaiah that the chapter had been talking about him since the Wednesday of the parking garage, and that the talking had produced some conclusions, and that the conclusions were not obligations that Isaiah was required to accept, and that he was going to lay them out plainly, and Isaiah could take as long as he needed to decide what he wanted from them. He said the chapter was going to cover the community college tuition for as long as Isaiah was enrolled and maintaining his grades. He said the Saturday morning slot at the garage was Isaiah's if he wanted it, learning engines on a schedule that did not conflict with school, and that the work came with a rate that would make the bakery shift unnecessary if Isaiah decided he was done with early mornings. He said the weekly room on Pratt Street was paid through the end of the academic year, and that after that, the chapter had a contact at a building on Sycamore Street with a unit that rented at a rate Isaiah could manage on one job. He said none of this was charity, and that the word charity was not a word the chapter used, because charity implied a direction, and what the chapter was describing was not a direction, but a presence. People who had decided to show up and who intended to keep showing up. Isaiah stood in the center of the garage and listened to all of it without moving. His hands were at his sides, and his face was carrying the specific stillness of someone receiving something they have wanted for a long time, and who does not yet know if receiving it is safe. Danny spoke next. He said he wanted Isaiah to know that the chapter had not made these decisions because of what Isaiah had done in the parking garage, that the parking garage was the reason they had found him, but not the reason they had decided what they decided. He said they had decided it because of what they had learned about who Isaiah was across the past 3 weeks, and that those were different things, and the difference mattered. Isaiah looked at Danny and then at the floor. Then Marcus stood up from the chair near the office door. He was not a large man, and he did not fill the room the way the chapter members filled it. But he had a quality of stillness in that moment that made the room attend to him. He looked at Isaiah, and he told him that he had closed his file on his 16th birthday because the system required it, and that he had told himself Isaiah was capable and would be fine, and that capable and fine were not the same thing, and that he had known the difference and had chosen the easier definition anyway. He said that was not a thing he could undo, and that he was not standing here asking Isaiah to receive an apology as though an apology was adequate. He said he was standing here because he had a folder in his desk drawer with Isaiah's name on it, and because he had opened it and read it properly for the first time 2 weeks ago, and because reading it had made him change the way he was reading 3 other folders, and because Isaiah deserved to know that what happened to him had not been without consequence, even if the consequence had arrived late. Isaiah looked at Marcus for a long time. His hands were still at his sides, and his face was still carrying the stillness, but something had shifted in it, something very small and specific. The way a room shifts when a window is opened and the air changes without the light changing. He told Marcus that he did not need the apology, and that he was not saying that to let Marcus off the hook, but because it was true, and because what Marcus had said about the 3 other folders was worth more to him than an apology, and that he hoped Marcus understood the difference. Marcus told him he did. Isaiah nodded once. Cole asked Isaiah what he was thinking. Isaiah looked at him, and then at the garage around him, the pegboard and the tools and the coffee on the filing cabinet, and the bikes in various stages of becoming whole again. He told Cole that he had spent 2 years building a life that depended on nobody, and that he had done it because depending on nobody was the only architecture that had not collapsed under him, and that what the chapter was describing required a different kind of architecture, and that he did not yet know if he could build it. Cole told him he did not have to build it alone, and that the point of what the chapter was offering was that he would not be building it alone. Isaiah told him that he understood that, and that understanding it and being able to act on it were different things, and that he needed Cole to know that the difference was real and not an excuse. Cole told him that was the most honest thing anyone had said in this garage in a long time, and that honest was the only currency that mattered here, and that Isaiah had just demonstrated that he had it. Nadia was not at the garage. She had wanted to be there, and Cole had told her it was not the right setting for her presence, and she had pushed back, and Cole had held his position, and she had conceded because she understood the distinction he was making, even if she did not like it. She was at the library on Cedar Street, and at 20 minutes past 10, her phone showed a text from her father that said 2 words. He stayed. She read it twice and put her phone in her apron pocket and went back to shelving books and did not take her phone back out for the remainder of the shift. Isaiah walked to the parking lot after. It was Cole's truck he had been driven in, and Cole had told him he could take it and that Danny would pick Cole up later, and Isaiah had not argued because arguing would have required more energy than accepting. And accepting was what he had decided to do, provisionally, in the way of someone who has decided to try a different architecture, and who is carrying the decision carefully, because it is new, and he does not yet know how much weight it will hold. He sat in the truck in the parking lot for a moment with both hands on the wheel, and looked at the garage through the windshield. He could see Cole through the open side door, already back at the workbench, working on something, not watching to see if Isaiah drove away. The not watching was deliberate, and Isaiah knew it, and the knowing of it sat in his chest in a way he did not have a word for yet. He started the truck and drove home. 4 months passed, and the room on Pratt Street began to feel like a place Isaiah lived rather than a place he was staying until something else happened, which was a distinction he had not been able to make about any space he had occupied in the previous 2 years, and which he noticed one morning in December when he woke up without the specific low-level alertness that had been his first experience of every morning since 16. The bakery shift was gone. He had told Patricia in October, carefully, the way he did things he wanted to do right. And she had told him she had been expecting it, and that the job would be there if he needed it, and that she expected a visit once a month minimum, or she would consider it a personal affront. He had told her he would come by. He did, twice in October and once in November. And on the November visit, she had a pastry in a box waiting for him on the counter without comment, and he had taken it without comment, and that was the full extent of the exchange, and it was enough. The community college application had been submitted in October with 3 letters attached. Gerald's letter was professional and specific. Patricia's letter was 2 pages and contained several sentences that Isaiah had not expected and that he had read standing in the grocery store parking lot where Gerald had given him the envelope, and that he had folded back into the envelope carefully and put in the small box on the shelf with the birthday card and the thrift store receipt, and Nadia's note from the library book. Cole's letter he had not read. Cole had sealed it and given it to Isaiah to submit with the others, and Isaiah had submitted it sealed and had not asked what it said. He thought about this sometimes, about a letter in a sealed envelope that described him to people who had not yet met him, written by a man who had known him for 6 weeks. And the thinking of it produced something he could not name exactly, but that was not discomfort. The acceptance letter came on a Tuesday in November. Isaiah read it at the small table in the room on Pratt Street, and then put it on the shelf next to the library book and the community college enrollment form, and went to his evening shift at the grocery store. He told Gerald when he arrived. Gerald shook his hand and told him the stock lead position would be waiting for him on weekends and school breaks if he wanted it. Isaiah told him he wanted it. He told Cole on Saturday morning at the garage. Cole was at the workbench, and Isaiah came through the side door at 9:50 the way he came every Saturday and sat in the chair, and Cole looked at him and waited. Isaiah told him he had been accepted. Cole set down his tool and looked at Isaiah for a moment, and then picked the tool back up and said, "Good," and went back to work. Isaiah watched him, and then picked up the wrench Cole had pointed him toward on his second Saturday and went to the bike he had been learning on and got to work beside him. They worked in the quiet of the garage for an hour before either of them said anything else, and the quiet was the good kind, the kind that accumulates between people who have established that they do not need to fill it. Marcus came by the garage on a Thursday in November. He had been twice before, once in October and once in early November, and each visit had been shorter and less formal than the one before it, in the way of visits that are becoming ordinary rather than significant. He brought coffee from the place on Clement Street and set a cup on the workbench beside Cole and one on the chair beside the office door for when Isaiah arrived later and sat down and told Cole that he had not closed any files early since October. Cole told him that was something. Marcus said it was not enough, but that it was what he had, and that he was working on what else it could be. Cole said that was all anyone could do. Marcus drank his coffee and looked at the garage and did not say anything else, and did not need to. Nadia came to the garage on Saturday mornings sometimes, not every Saturday. Enough Saturdays that her presence had become a reasonable expectation without becoming a certainty, which was the right frequency and which she had calibrated without discussing it with anyone. She and Isaiah had developed a conversational register that operated in the specific range between people who do not know each other well and people who know each other better than the time they have spent together would suggest. She had returned 2 more library books through him at the store, and he had read both of them and told her what he thought, and she had told him what she thought, and the telling had been honest on both sides in the way of conversations between people who have decided that honesty is the currency they are going to use. On the last Saturday before Christmas, Isaiah updated the work schedule for the new year. He sat at the small table under the thrift store lamp and wrote the grocery store weekend shift on the left side of the paper. The right side he left blank for the first time in 14 months, because the right side was where the evening shift had lived, and the evening shift was gone, and its absence from the paper was a fact he had to look at directly before he could fold the paper the way he always folded it. He folded it into quarters and put it in his shirt pocket and sat for a moment with his hand flat on his chest over the pocket where the paper was. One shift, space below it. The space was not absence. It was where the rest of the week was going to go once he understood what the rest of the week was for. He was at the garage at 9:50 on the Saturday before Christmas. Cole was already there, and the overhead lights were on, and the coffee was made, and a motorcycle Isaiah had not seen before was sitting in the middle of the floor, partially disassembled, the kind of project that was going to take months and that required someone with time to spend on it. Cole told him it was his to work on. Isaiah looked at the bike and then at Cole. Cole told him it was not a gift, that it was a project, and that the difference was that a project required something from him, and that what it required was Saturday mornings and patience and the willingness to make mistakes in front of people who were not going to make him feel bad about making them. Isaiah looked at the bike for a long time. Then he put his coffee down on the workbench and crouched beside the engine and looked at it the way he looked at everything that mattered, with the full systematic attention of someone who intends to understand it completely. Cole watched him for a moment and then went back to his own workbench and picked up his tool. Outside on Randolph Street, the December morning was cold and clear, and the garage was warm and smelled of oil and coffee, and the particular industry of people who are building something that will take longer than a morning and who are not in a hurry, because they have decided that the building is the point. Isaiah reached into his shirt pocket and took out the folded schedule and set it on the floor beside the bike where he could see it while he worked. One shift on the left, space on the right. He looked at it for a moment, and then looked at the engine, and got to work. The space was still there. It was not empty anymore. Isaiah Webb was 16 years old and living alone in a weekly rental room, and working 2 jobs and eating 1 real meal a day, and asking nobody for anything, because asking had never once produced what was asked for. On a Wednesday evening, he walked through a parking garage and saw something wrong, and stepped toward it instead of away from it, and paid for that decision with a split lip and bruised ribs, and walked home alone in the dark with steady hands. He did not do it because he expected anything back. He did it because not doing it was something he was not capable of. That is the whole of the explanation, and it is enough. There are people like Isaiah in every city in this country right now, carrying more than anyone around them knows, showing up with steady hands for strangers while no one shows up for them. Most of them never get a parking garage moment. Most of them never get found. Isaiah got found. What the chapter did with finding him was not a ceremony or a check or a headline. It was Saturday mornings and a sealed letter and a motorcycle that needed someone with patience and time and the willingness to build something slowly. That is what showing up actually looks like. Not grand, just consistent. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell us what part you are still thinking about. If you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe so you are here when the next one arrives. And if someone in your life is carrying something heavy and doing it quietly, send this to them today. We will see you in the next one.